All right, I think we're recording. I didn't hear the voice, but that's okay. So there it is. All right, delayed reaction, that's fine. So this is, let's see what day is today. It's Friday, July 15th. And today for boot camp, we're talking about scales and intervals. So those were the two kind of concepts presented this week. And one of the things that we'd mentioned was that it might be easier to actually talk about them scales first and then intervals. So let's do.
I thought that the intervals were really confusing.
Yeah, and that's very common. And let me see if I can draw a really quick staff here so I can show you a couple of different options with those intervals. So the way that, you know, a lot of music theory textbooks do this, actually, the way that they're like, you know, presented initially is here's a staff, or I don't know, do you play piano at all? Have you had any piano?
Wait 1 second. I used to play the piano.
Okay, so that's another way to think about it. Sometimes what I do is I draw like my little keyboard, right? So like here's middle C, all right, and then I've got my keyboard right in front of me. Sometimes it's easier to see with a keyboard. Sometimes it's easier to see on the staff. It just depends on how your brain works, right? So intervals are literally the space between two notes, right? We have two kind of designations when it comes to intervals. We've got raw intervals, and then we have the quality of the interval. So the raw interval is strictly the number, okay? And the easy way to find this is count the note you start on and the note you're going to, and any notes in between. So let me use a different color here so it stands out. If we're looking at, let's just say G up to B. Okay, the distance of this interval is going to be a third because we've got G, we've got A, and we've got B. 1, 2, 3, third. Okay, so that's pretty easy. The raw number is just, you know, how wide are we talking here, right? You could see it on the piano too, right? So here's G. This looks a little messy, right? G, A, B. Now, when we're looking at the piano, it might be a little bit more confusing because we've got the black keys in between. We're not considering accidentals when we talk raw interval number. So raw interval is literally just, here are three, you know, or more. Like, for example, here's another interval, right? What's the distance between the second interval there? Well, we look at E, and we've got F, G, A, B, C, D, E. Counting the ends, we've got 8, right? So that's an octave.
Yeah. So the numbers I thought were pretty easy, but I wasn't sure how to like get the, like it would say like major, minor. I wasn't sure how to determine if it was whatever.
So there, yes, and that's where it starts to get a little fuzzy, right? So here's the thing. Major intervals relate to the major scale. Minor intervals relate to typically the natural minor scale. Okay. And I'm going to show you that in just a second here. So that might clarify that a little bit. The other tricky part though, is that we have augmented and diminished intervals, and then we have perfect intervals. So if we think of like a pyramid. Okay. The widest intervals we could have are augmented intervals. And then as we go down, the next widest would be major, and then minor, and then diminished at the bottom. So when it comes to, you know, the relationship between augmented and diminished to major and minor, major intervals are obviously a half step bigger than minor intervals. Augmented intervals are a half step bigger than major intervals. Diminished intervals are a half step smaller than minor intervals. So we have sort of a spectrum of quality when it comes to, you know, here's our raw interval number, and then depending on the accidentals, how many of each of these half steps do we need to take into account? Okay. Now, The other one is perfect. When we have an octave, okay, or when we have a unison, so maybe our interval was just 2 E's, or when we have what we call a perfect fifth, okay. Perfect fifths are present in both major and minor scales. Then we have something that is called a perfect interval, okay. The reason why it's called perfect is because on our harmonic series, they are the notes that are closest to our fundamental note. So let me see if I can get another whiteboard here. For example, let's say our C, let's just take middle C, okay, for our fundamental. And let's just say, I'm making this up, okay, this is totally just for demonstration purposes, but let's just say this is what the wave looks like on that note. Okay, nice and regular. I mean, I'm not an artist, but okay. And the crest of that wave, that sound wave, always happens here. And I'm going to make us a nice long line. You'll see why in a minute. Okay. So the crest shows us the frequency, you know, how often that crest comes is called frequency. And then the amplitude is actually the height of the wave. Okay, so there's some technical science terms for you here. Okay. Now we care about amplitude insofar as it might relate to, you know, the volume or the different pitches. Okay. But for the sake of this demonstration, what we're really concerned about is frequency, because that's going to determine, you know, our interval note. Okay. So on a harmonic series, and you might know this from guitar because you've got harmonics all over guitar. The harmonics that go up from the interval, the fundamental, start with an octave. Okay. So we're going to call this C1 for the sake of, you know, argument, and then C2. And the interesting thing about C1 to C2, that ratio is 2-to-1, right? So for every 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. Just imagine these are all very equal. But point is, we've got one wave in C1 where, or sorry, we have 2 waves in C2 where we previously had 1 wave in C1. So our ratio for that is 2-to-1. And because of the kind of transparency between the two, it sounds very, very good to our ears. Okay. It sounds almost like the same note. So let me turn my original sound on just to be safe, but I'm not sure that you'll hear this very well anyway. Just, you know, that it's, how do you do this when I'm window help? No, that's not what I want. I want, what happened to that other menu? Come on, menu. Why can't I turn my sound on? That's weird. Okay. Okay. Nope, that wasn't it. I got a menu to pop up, but that wasn't the right one. Well, hopefully you can hear it. It's not going to be super duper loud. Let's just try it. Okay. So if I played a C, I'm going to play one below middle C because my middle C sticks. Well, no, I'll play middle C. It'll be fine. If I played a C and then played an octave higher, they are both out of tune right now, but they sound so similar because the ratio is such a pure ratio. Pythagoras is actually the one that figured this out. Okay, Pythagoras did a little walk through, I don't know where he was, Athens or something, right? Walked through town and came across a blacksmith shop and noticed that the anvils they were using sounded like an octave. And upon further inspection, he looked a little closer, and the anvil that was twice as big was the lower sound, and the one that was twice as small was the upper sound. And so he determined that, like, wow, there is a ratio here in mass of the anvils that equates to the sound that they're making. And so what we can kind of gather from this, okay, so we've got C1, C2. Let's just say you're on guitar. The way you find this on guitar is you take a string and you basically cut it in half, right? So there's your string, you cut it in half, there's your ratio of 2:1, and your sound wave goes up. If you cut it in half again, or find the next harmonic, the next partial is actually G, okay? And that is a fifth. That's our interval of our perfect fifth. And it turns out the ratio here is 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm not a good artist. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Imagine that's super even. Okay. And that ratio is 3:2, because for every 3 waves on the G, we have 2 on the one lower on C. And then we go up again, we get another C up here. C3 has 4 waves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Right? And so the ratio here is 4:3. Okay. And of course, the ratio to the fundamental is that it's another octave, right? Because we've just doubled, 1 to 2, 2 to 4, right? We've doubled our waves. So these intervals, because they're so close to the fundamental and so pure in relation to the fundamental, we call them perfect intervals. So unisons, octaves, and fifths and fourths are all considered perfect, because this is a fourth here going from C to G and then G up to C. Okay, so we have a fifth and then a fourth. Now, once we get beyond this in the harmonic series, things start to break down a little bit. We don't have as pure an interval. Okay, we start to go up beyond this, and it starts to go to E, and then another G, and then we get a B flat, then we get another C. Okay, it starts to kind of get a little strange up toward the top. So these are thirds, right? These are all thirds, major, minor thirds. And then up here, we actually have a major second. So and theoretically, the harmonic series can continue beyond this, but not many instruments can play beyond that, because, it would be dividing. We basically start getting into quarter tones. We'd be dividing that string into such small little spots that, it either wouldn't vibrate or we wouldn't be able to hear it. So like I said, mathematically we could continue, but it isn't going to be a practical thing, right? So anyway, that is the basis for all of our intervals, but at least for understanding the perfect intervals. So once we get through those couple perfect intervals, then we can start talking about, okay, is it major, minor, augmented, or diminished? Now, I want to just cover 2 intervals really quickly, and I'm going to change the color here again. Let's just say we're in treble clef. I didn't do that earlier. And I want to talk about whole steps and half steps. Those are the basic intervals for anything, right? So a whole step is where you're basically going, well, let's talk about half step first. You're going one key to any other key on the piano. So let's just take D, right? D up 1 key, the next key would be a black key. D to E flat, half step. Okay, so maybe do this up here. A half step is also called a minor second. That's the smallest interval we could possibly have. All right. Remember, if we start here and we go up a half step, we go to major. Okay, so we're going to change this to a major second by expanding that little interval and going a half step wider. So we're going to go D to E natural. Okay, and if you look at that, D, we do into E flat, we go one more half step, we're at E natural. Okay, so that's what we call whole step, or a major second. Now, there's a question I've had about this. Can we change the D? Theoretically, yes, that would be fine. You have to be careful, because depending on what you're doing later, like when we talk about chords next week, we're going to start building these chords. We really can't change that, what we call the root of the chord. Okay, so depending on the assignment might say, don't change the original note that we give you, just change the other notes around it. But technically speaking, yes, if you were at D and you went up to E flat, but you needed to create a major second, you could go down a half step, and then this would also be a major second going D flat to E flat. Okay, it's possible, but you know, the given note, we're going to try not to change for now, just because it's good practice for next week. Okay. Now, having said that, okay, we've got major and minor seconds, right? Let's take a look at another staff here, and we're going to talk scales just for a minute. And I think that will make a lot of the other intervals clear. Now, you could keep continuing up in half steps and reach the other intervals. So for example, before I do this, let me just go back here. So we started on D, and I'm going to do a different color just to stand out here. So D to E flat was a major second. Remember that the raw interval number also has to reflect the same number of letter names. So I can't say D to D sharp because that's technically an augmented unison, right? So we have those two parts of the interval, and the raw number always has to reflect the correct spacing of the letter names, right? So these are seconds because we've got D and the E. Now, okay, so we said we went D to E flat, that's minor second. E flat to, well, E flat to E natural to get up there is a major second. So D to E is a major second. If we go another half step, oops, what am I doing here? Let me get to a different, there we go. Go to another half step, we have F. Well, now we've got three notes, D, E, F, that is a minor third. And then we go up again to F sharp, that's a major third. Okay, so we can keep creeping and crawling up by half step and get to all of our intervals, right? So D to G is a perfect fourth. D to G sharp is an augmented fourth or diminished fifth. They are enharmonic. D to A is a perfect fifth. D to B flat is a minor sixth. D to B natural is a major sixth. D to C, I'll keep going here for a minute. D up to C is a minor seventh. And then D to C sharp is a major seventh. D to D would be an octave. Okay, so you could, if you needed to, like counting them out, you could actually look at how many letters you've got, right? Look at how many note names you have, make sure the raw interval is correct, and then count up the half steps to see how many you're getting, you know, for your quality. I've had students do that, you know, and that seems to resonate with them. I think what resonates a little bit better though is relating it to the scale. And so this is where the scale comes into play. Now, what we learned this week was major scale is constructed with a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Okay, what does that look like? Let's stick to D since we started this. Okay, so D, whole step to E, half step to, oh, sorry, I kind of did this backwards, didn't I? Here, let me erase this. It'll be a little bit easier to see. Okay, I'll choose a different color. Green. Okay, so D, oh, I am just not good at this yet. Okay, one more line. We'll get that up. Now I need to change my drawing tool. Okay, there it is. Okay, so we have D and then a whole step up to E. I'll put these in between, and then a whole step up to F sharp, then a half step to G, so whole step, half step, like that, and then whole step again to A, whole step again to B, then again to C sharp, and then a half step up here. Okay, so there's our D major scale, and you've probably played D major scales before, right? So so this, you know, kind of is related to key signature and key area. So we've got F sharp and C sharp that tie us to this format of whole, half when we start on D, and that becomes our key signature for D major. Okay, so now that we're in a major mode, and we know we're in a major mode, and we've used our half steps and whole steps to identify the notes in this mode, let's talk interval. Okay. In a major key, you've got a major second between the first and second scale degree. Okay. You have a major third between the first and the third. Oh, sorry. Did I put minor? That's not right. It's major. Oh, I don't know that I can erase that without erasing all that other stuff. So I'm going to just write over it. There. Okay. Fourths and fifths are always perfect. So perfect fourth up to G, perfect fifth up to A. D up to B is a major sixth. D up to C sharp is a major seventh. And then your octave is perfect octave. So if you know your key signatures and you know your scales, and you could easily build a scale based on whole steps and half steps or major and minor seconds, then you can identify intervals pretty quickly based on the key signature and where they are in the scale. Okay. So for example, if we did, let's see, F, and this is F natural, up to D. Okay. First thing is, what's the raw number? Well, F, G, A, B, C, D, we have a sixth. Okay. Some kind of sixth. Is D part of the F major scale? Well, I only have one flat in F major. So yes, D is part of the F major scale. Therefore, this is a major sixth. So that ends up being, you know, a kind of a quick way to get to quality, at least major or minor quality. Now, let's say I had this F to D sharp. Whoa. Okay. Well, it's not part of the major scale, right? Because I'm thinking about my F major scale and I only have a B flat. I don't have a D sharp in F major. I do have a D, right? So if I think about the D being major, then D sharp being a half step more is going to be augmented. So this is an augmented sixth rather than a major sixth. See? So you can relate all the other qualities to the major or minor scales. For the sake of the minor, we can do a couple of different things. Okay, you could think about descending intervals, and those will get you minor interval qualities. So for example, I'm going to do this in red. D to C sharp is a minor second. D to B is a minor third. We always have perfect fifths, always have perfect fourths. You know, those never ever change. And then D down to F sharp, minor sixth. D down to E, minor seventh. And then of course you have your perfect octave at the bottom. Okay. So that's one way to think about minor quality intervals. If you think about a minor scale, if your brain really likes the ascending, you know, version of this exercise, you could do a minor scale. It's just going to be natural minor. So you have to think about that. We don't want to alter the minor for harmonic or melodic minor. Remember, we learned about that this week too. And, you know, so you're always relating it to what's happening in the natural part of the mode. So let's just take, I don't know, let's start on D again, and we'll take D minor. Now, the way that I like to think of the minor modes is I think of what's the relative major key signature. And the relationship between a minor mode and its relative major is a minor third. So if I take D and I go up a minor third, well, I know that the major third is F sharp, because that was what we just had on the last slide, right? That was D, E, F sharp. So if I want to do minor, it's going to be F natural. Okay. So F natural that's actually my, what we call relative major. Relative major. Okay. So I take the key signature of F major and apply it to the minor mode. Okay. So that's the key signature of F major. D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, B. All right, so let's look at these intervals. D up to E, that's not quite as neat. That's still a major second. But D to F, that is a minor third. And then we've got perfect fourths, perfect fifth. Notice that they are the same in this minor mode as they were in the previous mode, okay, in the major. D up to B flat is a minor sixth because prior to this we had a B natural. D up to C is a minor seventh. Again, we had C sharp on the last slide, so those check out. And then we have a perfect octave. So the minor mode sort of works. We have already just memorized and learned major and minor seconds. So hopefully this little thing at the beginning doesn't trip us up, but everything else works, you know, as far as relating the interval, the given interval ascending to a minor, natural minor scale. So it really just depends on what makes more sense to you. If you like the concept of, you know, identifying intervals by half step, you could just memorize, you know, all the half steps. If you like the concept of identifying intervals by harmonic series and overtone series, you kind of remember your perfect fourths and fifths pretty easily that way. And then all the other, you know, all the other intervals kind of fall into place around that. Or like what I personally prefer, I just memorize major and minor seconds, and then I build my scales, at least the major scales, because those are easy to remember, right? With whole steps and half steps, major, minor seconds. And then I just think about, okay, in whatever my tonic key signature is, in a major key, does the intervallic note fit? If it does, it's major. If it doesn't, how does it relate to the major? If it's a half step shorter or more narrow, then it's minor. If it is a half step larger, it's augmented. If it's a whole step shorter, it's diminished. And so that's an easy-ish way for me to figure out quality. Before we jump to questions, let's just talk one other quick concept here, and that is inversion, okay? There's a little tiny bit in the module, because like I said, boot camp moves fast after week one. There's a little tiny bit about the rule of 9 and inversions of intervals. So the rule of 9, it really only exists as 9 because when we count intervals, we count the upper note and the lower note. You know, we count that letter name in our raw interval structure. So when we have intervals that invert, we actually end up counting one of those notes, whichever, the upper or lower, twice. And that's where we get 9 instead of 8. Okay, so let's talk what is inversion first, and then we'll kind of map out a couple of intervals. So inversion is basically when you're taking a note, okay, let's just say we're going from F to A, this is a major third. You're taking a note, crossing the space of the other one so that you can move the previous note to its octave counterpart. Okay, inversion is always by the octave. So we took this F, we're crossing the space of the A, and we go up to the other F. Now, originally, I said that this was a major third, right? The first interval here. When we invert it, because we're counting this interval twice, we're counting it as the upper interval, and then when the note's inverted, we count it as the lower interval. We have to subtract 9, or from 9, to get the new interval. So 3 from 9, easy, is 6. So this new interval here, the A up to the F, is a 6th. Now, when you invert intervals, your quality always inverts as well. So major becomes minor, augmented becomes diminished, perfect stays the same. So this one was previously major. This is now minor sixth. Okay, so that's the concept of inversion. It happens the other direction too. So let's just say we have, let's do a B flat to an F. Okay, and let's invert the F down. Okay, the first, let me get a different color there. The first interval here was actually a perfect fifth. And when we invert the F to get the new interval, wait a minute, did I do that right? Oh, I didn't write it on the right line. There we go. Sorry, I thought it looked weird. That's because I wrote it on a line and not space. There we go. So the new interval there, we have to subtract from 9. So 9 minus 5 is 4. Okay, so this new interval is going to be a fourth. Perfect always stays the same. So we get a perfect fourth. So that's why in our harmonic series, we saw an octave, we saw a fifth, because those are the most pure intervals we have. And then that next, interval up, the next overtone up is a fourth, because the repeat of the previous octave, we've got a fifth and then a fourth back to back, and those are inverted intervals. So, okay, that's a major, major, major crash course in scales and in inversions, and in a normal year-long music theory course, we would probably practice this for at least 2 weeks. We're just sort of, like I said, crash course, right? Boot camp is kind of nose to the grindstone type of stuff for this, for this unit. So before we do any practice, do you have any questions right now?
No.
No. Okay. So that all kind of made sense, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me get our practice up for today, and we can do a little bit. Oh, sign me out. There we go. We can do a little bit of it just to reinforce this a little bit. So let's do intervals first. There. I forget what it was. At one point I had I don't know what I can do about sharing. Hold on a minute here. Oops. New share. There we go. All right. I had an interval worksheet at one point that was a link, and then I don't know what happened to it. It kind of, the link broke, or there was something going on with the site, and I don't remember what it was. So this one is embedded. So the spacing hopefully looks okay. But anyway, all we need to do, they're all in treble clef, is just identify the quality. This one calls quantity the raw interval number. Okay, it's the same thing. There's no difference in terms of what it is. It's just a terminology issue. So let's name a few of these just for practice. So
the first one would have the number of 2.
Be careful. You have to count the note you start on and the note you end on.
Yeah, so 2.
But count everything in between too.
Doesn't look like there's, or I think there might be one thing in between, so then it would be 3 maybe.
It would be 3, correct. Yeah, exactly. Can I write on this? Yes, I can. Okay, so the raw interval is a third. Now, quality wise, think of your C major scale, right? C is on the bottom of this interval. Is E natural part of the C major scale?
Yeah.
All right, then we have a major third. Okay, so next one. C is on the bottom again, and then we have A flat. What's the raw interval here?
6.
6, good. All right. Is A flat part of the C major scale?
No.
Not. A natural is part of the A major scale. So compared to A natural, A flat is a half step narrower. So what's the quality here? We need to go a half step narrower than major.
Minor.
Minor. Yeah. Minor 6. Ta-da. Now, if you wanted to think of the C minor scale like a natural minor, you could do that. I think sometimes we come at the minors through the major, you know, through the relative major. And so it's an extra step to think of the minor key signature. But I will say, once you get to using these frequently, especially those minor scales in relation to the major scales, and you know, if you're doing your majors and minors every day on your instrument, it's going to be second nature no matter how you think of it. So anyway, I usually relate it to the major because it's a little quicker for me, but you can do either. Okay, C up to F. What do you think about this one?
The major 4.
It is a fourth. And remember, fourths always carry a certain quality.
So I don't think it's minor. I don't think it's major. So it's one of the other ones.
Correct. Yes, it's neither major or minor. You remember that overtone series?
So it's either diminished or augmented.
There's one other one. We do often see augmented fourths, but this one is not an augmented fourth. We use the same designation for octaves and fifths as well.
Oh, perfect. It says on the top.
Yeah.
It says, for example, C to F.
Perfect fourth. Yeah, you're right. Perfect fourth. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's do another one and then we'll jump to a different something that's not C. But anyway, let's do C up to B flat.
Seven.
Yeah.
Minus 7.
Exactly. Yep. Minor 7. Yep. Because B natural would be the major mode, right? And so half step shallower is going to be the minor. Yeah. Good. Let's scroll down a little bit here. I'm going to have to erase this because that's just how Zoom works. Let's scroll down and do another one. Let's do. They don't get very adventurous in their chord qualities here. Let's do these two up here in the very top row. So let's do G to F sharp. How about that one?
Seven.
Good. I can't draw. There we go.
Wait, can minors be? Wait, what scale is this?
So G is the bottom note. Think about your G major scale. Does F sharp belong in a G major scale?
Yeah.
So this one's major. There we have it. Yeah. And you're right. Your original question about minor, like the minor mode, you can have sharps in a minor mode. It does happen. It's not frequent, but it does happen. So when we get down around the bottom of the circle of fifths, and you get to keys that actually begin with a sharp, like C sharp major, you could have minor intervals that have sharps in them. So anyway, not super common, but yeah, it's always good to check on those. Okay, how about that last one there? G to A natural.
Would that be 2?
It's 2. It's a second. Yep.
I think that would be a major 2.
Major. Yeah, exactly. So if it's a half step, it's that minor second. And then if it's a little bit wider than that, 2 half steps, it's a major second. Good. So you're getting it. We're getting the hang of this a little bit. Let's do a quick, let's see here. Oh, I need my mouse back. There we go. Let's do a quick check on scales. I think we pretty much covered everything. We talked about the relative minor scales. An easier way to understand relative minors or relative majors, because this is in relation to parallel major and minor, which I don't remember if I put in here. Yeah, parallel keys. Parallel major and minor have the same tonic or the same name. Relatives share the same key signature. So the way I think about this, there was a TV show, I don't know, 15 years ago or something on ABC that was something that I can't remember the title exactly, but I think it was something like Same Name. And the show was all about people that happened to have the same name as a celebrity. And those two people would switch, switch positions for a day or for a week. So like, imagine, Tom Cruise, the actor, switches lives for a week with, Tom Cruise, the electrician from Indiana, you know what I mean? Or something like that. So, they don't have anything else in common except the name. And parallel majors and minors are a little bit that way. They share a tonic, but the actual makeup of the scale is different. The intervallic structure is different. Relatives, you have relatives, right? You've got brothers. You all share parents, right? So you are relatives because you share the same DNA, and relative keys share the same DNA, right? So they have different tonics, but the same key signature. So G major and E minor, for example, share that same F sharp, right, in their key signatures. E flat major and C minor share the same key signature, that kind of thing. So the relationship is the tonic of the major mode, major scale, is 3 half steps or a minor third above the tonic for the minor mode. So 2 ways you can figure this out. You start with your major, you just count down 3 half steps, or you look at the 6th scale degree of your major mode. So C major, go up 6 notes, you go to A minor would be the relative minor of C. So there's a couple of different ways to think about it. If you like looking at your piano, it's easy to see 3 half steps pretty clearly, right, on the keyboard. If it makes more sense to kind of, keep practicing your major scales, just head to that 6th scale degree, you'll find the same note. And it's a good way to check maybe that, that you have the same note either way. And then we briefly talked about, just a couple slides ago, talked about not just finding the scale, but altering the minor scale. See, the natural minor doesn't have a leading tone. That's that 7th scale degree. And the 7th scale degree, that is a half step from the tonic, really pulls us to the tonic. And when we don't have that, we don't have what we call a functional dominant. We'll talk about dominance next week. But in terms of the functional dominant, we really can't have good harmonic progressions without a functional dominant. So we're a little stuck when it comes to a minor mode that doesn't have a leading tone. If we raise the leading tone, we get something called the harmonic minor. So for example, if we took that E minor, mode that we just mentioned, you said it's the key signature of G, right? So we have E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E, right? So that's the right key signature. If we took that mode and we wanted to create a leading tone, we would have to raise the D and make it a D sharp. Okay, so adding that sharp, I'm going to do this in a slightly clearer way. Adding that sharp creates, creates a leading tone for us. And once we have a leading tone, we can have a functional dominant, which leads us to the right harmony. So that's a good way to remember. Harmonic minor gives us the harmony, right? That dominant scale. So, or the dominant chord. So that is just raising the 7th scale degree. Now, the problem with this, and it's kind of hard to see this way or on a scale or on a staff. The hard part about this scale is this interval here. Okay, so what is that interval? We have C to D sharp. I'll give you a hint.
Oh, the interval from C to D sharp?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be minor 2?
Close. You're right that it's a 2. It is a second.
Major 2?
Closer. You're getting warmer. Keep going.
Diminished 2? I'm not sure.
You went the opposite way. Let me show you here. So let's see. This is C, right? We want a half step to C sharp, a half step to D. That would be a whole step. That would be a major second. This one goes to D sharp. Boom, up here. That's an extra half step. However, the second never changes. We still just have D and E. So this is where the augmented second comes in. It's more than a major second, but we still have those 2 notes there. We still just have that same raw interval. So we can't say that it's a minor third. It's actually an augmented second. So the issue with the augmented second is that it's a very difficult interval to sing. And it creates kind of a wide space in our scale. Okay, it creates a very awkward leap for us. And in 16th, 17th, 18th century part writing, they avoided that kind of an interval. So now we have a functional dominant, but we have this really weird melody. And so in order to fix the melody, we have to go to our melodic minor, this one. Okay, that's where we keep that raised 7th, but we also raise the 6th. So now we basically have this hybrid scale. We've got kind of a major scale, or sorry, a minor scale up to here, and then a major scale up to here. Okay, because A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, those are all notes that are in an E major scale. But E, F sharp, and G natural are only found in the E minor scale. So it's an interesting little thing that we've done here, but we basically fix the melody, and that's the melodic minor. The issue with melodic minor, this is great ascending because we're getting up to that upper tonic, but we don't have any reason to use these alterations when we're descending because we're going away from the tonic at that point. We're going back down the scale. So when we go up and we raise all this stuff, we alter it to go back to the original format on the way back down. Now, just like we were talking about, there are sharps and, possible sharps in minor intervals. There are also kind of mixed possibilities with these notes that are up at the top of a melodic minor scale. Sometimes they will be naturals, and then you'll have to flat them again on the way back down. Sometimes, like in this case, they're going to be sharp, and then you natural them on the way back down. So it's good to just kind of double check, that that your mode is correct, okay, on either end. We talked a little bit about solfege last week. I did put the solfege in the writing here. So like, there's your solfege for melodic minor. And did I put it in? Oh, I put it in up here for natural minor. Okay. You can do solfege on the harmonic minor, but it does sound a little bit weird. It would be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So it starts to change a little bit. Anyway, very last thing on this page is about modes. So you've heard me say major mode, minor mode. We have something else called church modes. Okay. And these were used in the 14th, 15th, and even in the 16th centuries. I mean, heck, they're still used today. I did my my doctoral dissertation on a composer named Hugo Cowder, and he loved the Phrygian mode. He loved the Dorian mode. He wrote a lot of stuff in modes. Okay. He was emulating 14th and 15th and 16th century composers, but he still used them in the 20th century. So, so they're still used today. The Ionian is the major mode. Oops. There we go. Right. So that's the major scale. And the Aeolian is the minor scale, natural minor. So what we're really looking at here are these four modes in between as what we call church modes. Okay. And they evolved over centuries of chant, basically. That's the very short version of that lectures is these modes were the ones that were most used in church and in chant. Different modes were associated with different times of day, right? Like, for example, there were chants for Vespers. Vespers is an evening prayer. And so, you know, a specific mode would be used for evening prayer versus the matin, which is the morning prayer, right? So different modes were associated with different prayers and different chants. One interesting thing, and intervallically speaking, this is interesting, is this guy down here, the Locrian mode. Locrian mode was not used in church, specifically because it has a very distinctive tritone. What the heck's a tritone? Well, let's look at this real fast. So this is the mode that's based on B, okay? Meaning if you go to all the white keys on the piano and just played B to B on the white keys, you'd get the right intervallic pattern for the mode, okay? So B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So let's just look at the intervals here. We've got a half step, right? Minor second at the beginning. We have a minor third, B to D. We have a perfect fourth, B to E. And then we have this half step here between E and F. A half step above a perfect fourth is not a perfect fifth. We actually have this interval in here that is called a tritone. Okay. And a tritone is 6 half steps. Now, in this case, the tritone actually divides the octave, the B to B octave, completely evenly, right in half. Okay. But early Christians were not looking at that. They weren't like, hey, symmetry. They were looking at the fact that this was 6 half steps and the fact that the upper half of the scale was also 6 half steps. So, so the association that they had with the 6 being kind of a representation of Satan was enough for them to say, I don't think we want that mode in church. So B, Locrian, was not actually Locrian mode at all, was not actually performed in church. What they did instead was they took these 4 modes and they would sing or perform them, you know, from the tonic up to an octave, but most commonly they went tonic to the 5th. And so sometimes what they did was they would actually start the mode on the 5th and just do the upper half from the 5th to the tonic. And in that case, we call those the hypo modes. So for example, we would have a hypo Dorian mode. And instead of D to A, we would actually go A to D. And so that was considered the hypo Dorian rather than Dorian just starting on a different note. This is, again, very oversimplified because there's a lot more complicated compositional stuff that goes along with modes. Like, for example, we have something called a recitation tone, and that plays into whether we have a Dorian mode or a hypodorian mode. The recitation tone is simply how many times do we repeat a particular pitch? And then that kind of gets ingrained in our brain because we hear it often, and then we think of that as the tonic. Okay, so in other words, do we hear D more or do we hear A more? If we hear D more, it's Dorian. If we hear A more, it's hypodorian. So there, again, you know, that's a very oversimplified version of it, but that's the basic gist of it. So, so those are modes, and, you know, we're not really going to use them when we're talking about chords next week. and triads, we're going to use more of the major scale and the minor scales, because chordal quality is related to intervallic quality. But it's good to know that the modes exist. You might come across music that is in a mode. You might play music that's in a mode. It's good to know that they are different from major and minor, and kind of just keep them in your toolbox, keep them in the back of your brain, because if you're ever analyzing music and it just doesn't fit very neatly into a major or minor, it might be a mode. So, all right, that's a lot of information. Do you have any other questions for me before we go today?
I was just a little bit confused on the augmented and diminished in intervals.
With intervals, that's yes. Okay, so let's go back for just a second here to, how do I get my little stop share? Let me go back to the whiteboard for a minute. Hopefully it saved it. Yay. Okay. So when it comes to intervals, the augmented and diminished stuff, with a couple of very few exceptions, actually. B is one exception. So B natural to F natural, that's going to be a diminished fifth. But F to B then is going to be diminished, augmented fourth. With that one exception though, if you have an augmented or diminished interval, you're usually going to have an accidental with it. Okay, so that's an easy way. Like if you see an accidental, it's kind of like, I better double check this, because otherwise it's just that one example is really, B, can create an augmented or diminished interval without an accidental on it. So, for example, let's just take the scale that we've got in front of us right now. Let's say that we had G flat. Let's say we were going D to G flat. Okay. Well, we know that D, even major or minor, if we go up to G in either of those scales, that would be what we call perfect. Okay. Anytime that perfect changes, just like major or minor, it goes to the augmented or the diminished side of things. So major and minor, we had that triangle or the upside down pyramid. We could probably also include perfect in that scenario. Okay. So that if we go a half step more, it would be augmented, and a half step less, it would be diminished. So this, coming from a perfect interval, would actually be a diminished fourth, right? Because G up to D flat compresses that perfect interval. If we had a G sharp, let's say we had G sharp, D up to G sharp actually is still a fourth, right? D to G, but in our little scheme here, right, the perfect interval, if you go above the perfect interval, it's going to be augmented. If you stretch, if you augment the space, right? So that would be an augmented fourth. Similar things could happen with smaller intervals. So for example, if we had, let's say we had B double flat, right? Double flat and double sharp are accidentals like anything else. You're just going a whole step instead of a half step in those directions. So let's say we had a B double flat to a D. That's confusing. Let's count some half steps just to see where we are. So D to C sharp would be a half step, to C would be a whole step. So that's one whole step, right? If we went to B natural, that would be 3 half steps, right? So B natural would be a minor third, right? And if you think about the key of B major has a D sharp in it. So B to D natural would be the minor third. Okay. Add, because this is a double flat. If we added a flat, one flat, and went 1 half step further than the minor, we would be at major, right? So D to B flat would be the major third. Then if we go B double flat, we are expanding it just a little bit more. We have to go a little wider yet. That would be augmented. So this B double flat to D natural is actually an augmented third. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah.
See, I personally, I just relate everything to the middle of that pyramid. We've got major and minor. We know they're half step apart, and perfect is perfect. So it doesn't, it doesn't have a major or a minor connotation to it, but it's in the middle there with it. So if you're ever in an accidental situation where the distance between your notes is expanded beyond the major minor or the perfect, you're going to be augmented. And if you're ever kind of compressing beyond that major minor perfect, then you're diminished.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, that kind of comes with practice, just seeing those intervals and knowing, hey, that I've seen that before, and that's a diminished third, or that's an augmented fourth, or whatever. But for now, certainly counting them out is very, very helpful. So, okay, I wish I could stick around. I got to hop over to teach a lesson on a different Zoom page. So I'm going to end the recording and put it up. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me. And you can also view the recording later. It might make more sense to kind of come back and look at it again.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week for chords.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.